We Do Not Part by Kang was such an experience for me. This is the first book I've read by this author, and I definitely want to check out all the other books she's written now because I loved this one so much. I don't even know how to properly describe this book. It was such an experience, and I feel like the experience is mostly in the telling, in the way the story is told, in the language that's used in this story. And I'm reading a translation. I wish I knew Korean so I could read it in the language it was originally written in. The very first scene of this book is a nightmare the main character is having. It is a reoccurring nightmare. She keeps seeing these tree stumps that are black, and they're stand out so starkly against this white snowfall. And she's in this graveyard that is near rushing water that is about to flood and overtake the graveyard. And she keeps having this reoccurring nightmare. And death and life and friendship and connections to people is such a big theme in this story. And our main character is exploring all of these things, and as she is going about her day contemplating this, she gets a call from her best friend who is in the hospital, and she goes to visit her friend in the hospital and then leaves to take care of her best friend's pets who are now home alone and need attention. And snow is such a big part of this because it's snowing in the very first part of the book, and then as she goes to the hospital and then leaves to go to her friend's house, there's this big snowstorm coming, and she's like waiting for the bus, and buses are being canceled, and she's trying to get there in time, and it's a good distance. Her friend lives a good distance from the hospital, so there's just like so much time just spent as our main character is continuing to reflect on all of these things. This story is also told not in exactly a linear fashion, or at least we get a lot of flashbacks. So I started out listening to the audiobook because that's what was available to me first before my library book came in. And whenever I was listening to the audiobook, I was like, we are just going back and forth in time, and it feels like it fits the theme so well of like not becoming so certain about life and not settling into the scene, and almost keeping this unsettled feeling as we're quickly shifting between time frames, because life can change that fast. And definitely the first part of this story just felt like how quickly and irreversibly life can change, and just everything kept reinforcing that. But we also get hope throughout that. There's a lot of bleak darkness in this story, but it's also about the connections to people. It's connections to those who are alive still with us and those who have already passed before us, and remembering them. And oh my gosh, this book. This book also deals a lot with the Jeju massacre, which I did not know about prior to reading this book. And as I was reading this book, I was becoming more curious. This is not something I've heard of before. So I started looking it up, and then I started looking up the author's life. And it's really interesting to see a lot of the mirrors between our main character in this book and the author's life. There seems to be a lot of parallels, even if it's not an exact retelling of the author's life. But both of them have family and friends who lived during the massacre, who lived through the massacre, and have talked about their experiences. And she goes into a lot of the history of that throughout this book. She keeps flashing back to times when her mom was little, and her mom was walking through these bodies looking for people that she knew. And she was talking about the snow falling and the snow laying on them and on their faces. And then our main character is walking through the snow and wondering, she's thinking about the water cycle and the snow falling, and maybe these are the same snowflakes. This is the same water that was falling on those who were dead in the field. And whenever I very first read that, my very first reaction was, oh my gosh, that is so terrible. I did not need that imagery. Why did you do that? Why would you say such a thing? And then I went, wait a second. This is actually brilliant, because snow, water, we open on a flood scene. Snow is such a big part of this book. And then our main characters explicitly mentioning the water cycle. And it's mirroring like the cycle of life, and how those who are dead are still with us, and how they're never truly gone. And definitely once I saw that, like made that connection, made that realization, it echoes through like everything in the book from then on. It was just like, how could I not have put that together already kind of thing. It's just like, oh my gosh. And there's so much symbolism in this book like that. And also, literally the title of the book is We Do Not Part. There's also parts of this book that seem very dreamlike, that seem very much like this can't actually be happening. This doesn't make sense. Definitely whenever I started part 2, I was just like, I'm a little confused. What's going on here? And there's definitely this dreamlike quality to it. And I feel like that's also intentional, you know, just as I was saying, not getting too settled into the story, realizing how fragile life is, but also just realizing the connections between people, and even people who are apart still having a strong connection and able to connect with each other. I feel like was such a strong theme, and the dreamlike quality really brought that out. There's also this line towards the end of the book that I feel like, there's so many lines in this book that I could pull out that I feel like kind of encapsulate a lot of the themes, but this one I feel like was really important, really stood out to me. I remember the feeling of aching love, how it seeped into my skin, clogging the marrow in my bones and shriveling my heart. That was when I realized that love was a terrible agony. And this is coming after we have spent a significant amount of time remembering those who were killed in the massacre, and looking at their stories, piecing their stories together from family stories, from newspaper clippings, trying to like find them and figure out who they were. And I feel like this book was also talking about remembering those who are dead, keeping their memories alive with us, is an act of love. And it's a terrible agony. It's like these things are joined together. It is a beautiful and an agonizing thing. And I feel like this book was doing that. It was trying to, you know, keep the memory of those who died in this atrocity alive. And it's talking about the connections that people have and how impactful people are on each other, and those relationships, those strong bonds, and how they never really end in death. There is so much I could talk about this book. There's so much symbolism. I feel like I would have to read it a second time to even fully understand everything that this book talks about. And on top of that, I've heard people say there's connections between this book and the previous books Kang has written. And I'm just like, well, I need to read all of her other books so that way I can see all of the connections. But as a little side note, our main character in this book suffers from migraines, and the author, Kang, also suffers from migraines, and she has written one of the best descriptions of migraines I have ever read as a fellow migraine sufferer. I lean my head against the cold window and bear the pain of my eyes being gouged by a dull blade. As ever, pain isolates me. I am trapped in the torturous moments my body generates second by second. I am dislodged from time prior to pain, from the world of the not ill. Dislodged from time prior to pain is such a good way of putting that, and not something that I've really been able to say. I usually say things like pain is all encompassing, but I love this book. I need to read all of her other books, and I need to reread this one because there's so much. I feel like if I read more, I would discover so many more things. So if you've read this, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on it are. If you noticed any metaphors or things that I have not brought up in this video, I would love to chat with you more, and I hope to see you in another video. Happy reading.